had to figure out is at the scale of building so many systems at the same time came the realization that this company was limited by its own R&D. So we had to embrace partnership. And I don't know about you, but the first time you bring partner to engineer, they look at this to say, why they're here? I can do better than those guys.
Oh, not
Just
invented here mentality. Any engineer
the
have that.
NIH is there. So we have to break that.
This is Adapt or Die, the show where growth stage founders, C-suite leaders, and visionaries unpack those moments that tested everything they knew, and a show of how they came out sharper on the other side. I'm your host, Andreas Pettersson. I'm a former tech CEO. Now I'm an advisor for high-performance leaders. Michel, thank you so much for joining this podcast. You made a bold bet. What did you see coming that others just missed?
Well, it's interesting. I think part of it is I had a good relationship with the founder. It's somebody that we bought this company 20 years ago at Cisco, the highest valuation of acquisition we made at the time. And this guy was kind of a bigger than life species, if you want, CEO, like an inventor, an engineer. He could do all the function of the company, but his dream was always to say, we're going to lay out fiber. And fiber simply because he has, to some extent, unlimited capacity and ability to carry all type of traffic. And more important, it doesn't rust in the ground. Mm-hmm. And nobody wants to steal it for copper or other type of use. So he had a vision to bring the technology that he had brought into the internet space into the broadband. The challenge was he was 20 years ahead of his time. So you can imagine trying to deploy fiber around farm and small town, not around data center, etc. When the costs were prohibitive, the technology to deploy were cumbersome. But he had such a vision that one day people would consume information, all type of data, voice, video provided by the cloud through a fiber to your device through Wi-Fi. So that was his vision, and he was relentless to it. When he approached me with the team to join, it was in 2014. They had been 20 years in the making, saw the revenue growing, then going down because it was phase of adoption. But he said, look, I see the industry changing. There's disruption coming. There's new technology we can use to build better product. I want to basically change the customer experience. And I want also to change the people that sell service to the end user because they have the worst trust in the industry. Nobody likes their service provider. Mm-hmm. So there has to be a better way for them to understand how to deliver services, build trust, build confidence, and sell more if you want. So I say, okay, if you want me to come, help you to achieve that goal, and then how we're going to run that inside a public company? Because my fears was always to say, everybody can say I'm going to do a startup within a big company. Yeah, that's a good story if you want, but really many fail into this. And basically what helped me the most to understand is Carl Russo, which is the name of the founder, was the largest shareholder of the company. And he said, I will take care of the market. I give you 5 years with the team to build what we need to create a new foundation. And then, with the rest of the team, we'll transform sales, we'll transform customer services, we'll create an ecosystem of partner. And back to the hardware, he said, look, nobody's going to win in this business by saying I'm faster than the other guy. You're just selling to the bottom. So that was a story. That was a condition, which was basically say, okay, if I can build anew from scratch, what do we do? And we decided to change what gets sold into the home, what is people call a Wi-Fi router, for example, these days, or a gateway. We say, they're not really reliable. People buy it into, the Best Buy, the retail store, try to install it, gave up, get frustrated, and they change all the time to follow the technology. I say, why don't we build what people say, a carrier class home gateway which will be more than just doing connection. It will provide essentially ability to optimize the traffic. So if you have a podcast and your kid are playing, video gaming next to you, you could say, hey, I'm Andreas. Daddy's running the business now. I want the bandwidth. I want the priority. Go down. And then, how do you basically provide an environment where everybody in the house can do work, live, and play if you want? So it forced us to rethink a little bit the notion of that equipment. In the core of the broadband network, to be honest, they were kind of a really dumb equipment. They were taking essentially the traffic from the home, turning around, pushing it somewhere else in the internet. There was no ways to scale really well the product. They were limited by bandwidth, by QoS, by this and that. And we say, look, why don't we take technology that used to exist outside broadband and bringing it closer, which happened to, for me, was a little bit natural because I say, I'm a routing guy. I know that those technology can not only do home delivery, or residential traffic. They should be able to do business. They should be able to do mission critical one day, because that's what we build on the other side of the internet. The only reason it wasn't done there is simply because the big routing company were selling in both. So think about it. If you sell something which is 100 times the cost, you don't want to make the same technology available cheaper. Otherwise, you shoot yourself in the foot, you commoditize yourself. But I have no constraint like that. So the first thing I realized that if I don't have the constraint of where the technology need to live to protect business or our revenue stream, let's take the best of breed of everything that exists. Let's be a system integrator. Any great thing that creates this unique customer experience, we'll bring it there. And with the team, after that, we turn our eyes on the cloud, because the cloud for most service provider was just network management. When you have a trouble, you call the call center. They say, oh, the light flashing on your gateway. Tell me what you did. Unplug this and unplug that. That was basically what people were trying to do in that space. And we said, come on, if we see the traffic, we should anticipate this. That was the beginning for us to say, maybe this kind of insight of collecting data, correlating, adapting it to the needs, will it be great one day that you don't have to call the data center? They call you to say, hey, by the way, you're close to the end of your bandwidth here. Why don't you get to the next tier? Why don't we manage your device so they don't all try to get the same thing at the same time. So that was the thinking. Now, what helped us is to say, okay, if we build those technology. So the first challenge we had to do was to say, let's assume I have a brand new Lego that never been seen in the industry. So I'm going to assemble the Lego. So the big choice or the big bit we did first was, are we going to rebuild the same type of product? The field or the salespeople will like to do that because they know the pitch, they know the playbook, they know how to do it. But I already got burned in my past building, let's say, better mousetrap, but selling it in the same market. And where I got caught is, how do you explain that the new thing is 10 times better than the whole, but the revenue, it's like 1% goes in one and 90% is on the whole? You kill yourself in this thing. So we decided to say, why don't we build things that never existed? The gateway, the home gateway, the new class of equipment in the core and then thing. And then we will have to teach people how to sell value to the end user, for service provider to have a new language of value versus speed and feed and reach. And that was a big bet because, look, it's something to say, I'm going to forklift my product to compete better with X, Y, and Z. But if you go and you say, I'm going to change the perception of the end user, I'm going to change the business model of the service provider, which we depend to sell our equipment. And by the way, in the process, we're going to try to change the industry to say they need to move away from copper and cable into fiber, or you're like, okay, wait, what else can we add as a battle? So that was the dynamic with it.
New product, new channel model, and it's a 2-tiered, even 3-tiered channel model.
Yeah.
And you have to convince people to sell it completely different as well.
Yeah. And think about it. To change the perception of the user, we had to give them tools to understand what the product can do. So we went from B2B to B2B to C, to customer. all around a period of time of 7 years. And look, there's a lot of things we didn't anticipate. So it's a great story, but our revenue stream were essentially at the time around 250 million. Oh no, 450. We were selling into a space called the copper, the DSL, the copper industry. We forecasted that if fibers start to rise, they were going to be the one that get out of, left over, if you want. They're going to be left behind because the technology cannot get to the speed and the scale. And then it's going to be cable versus fiber, or eventually satellite versus the two. But our revenue were 40% in that bucket. And suddenly what happened in 2016, as we're about to deploy all those solutions, our largest customer went literally almost belly up, decided to not to buy from us, and suddenly you're 30% less of revenue.
Ouch.
Ouch. And what do you do with this? And, do you change the plan? Do you try to go back to, buy the business back if you want? We just decided to finish the job. But internally, we have to make some change in terms of cost now. The budget wasn't the same. We're close to the end. We're trying to make sure nobody, panic if you want. So we have to adapt a little bit to the reality of those constraints. That was around 2016, 17, where we had to do creative ways to maintain the pace of an innovation, but through partnership, through offshoring, to do different things if you want, and not lose sight of the mission. But I think the second thing that we didn't anticipate is because we needed to cut costs, I have to be more efficient in R&D. So one of the biggest things that was costing me in my portfolio was testing the equipment. I have to build those massive labs that replicate network, that replicate scale. And we say we can't afford to have one in Asia, one in China, one in US, or few. We're not going to be able to make it with this thing. So we decided around 2017 to put everything in one lab, make it completely automated, virtual, and the engineer could click into, I want to test this. The lab will assemble the topology itself, provide the equipment, send it back the day after for somebody else. That was a big bet. Didn't exist at the time. We pushed the technology. But the reason why I'm saying this is, without knowing, we were essentially using this lab working from home.
Wow.
We were creating an environment that was virtual without knowing me. And around 2019, end of 2018, bang, COVID hit.
Mm-hmm.
So in one way where we got lucky is, despite how terrible it was we had no hit on the business because we were already virtual. Sales could connect to all the system because they were in the cloud. Our service organization hardly was completely able to develop remotely with the partner. So we didn't lose a beat. But the other thing we didn't anticipate will be people will have to leave the big corporate office, work from home. And guess what? People realize what bandwidth was about now because you have to live with everybody all the time.
Trust me, I know. I had 3 kids at home, all doing remote school, while me and my wife was trying to all sit in meetings at the same time. Not fun. And by the way, I don't have fiber at home, which kind of sucks.
Yeah, but that's where it was funny, is to some extent the validation of the new world we were painting came from the global market. So everybody started to realize bandwidth matter as people were leaving city like San Francisco because they needed to find another place to live. It changed a little bit the notion of digital divide. Suddenly it was like, the people that will have access to technology where they can work, live, and play, work at distance, etc., are probably going to do better than place where none of these things is accessible. And suddenly the government decided to say, it's a national infrastructure problem now. We're going to inject money for service provider to pay for these type of equipment. So, in the perfect storm, you're like, oh my God, everything hit now. And then, the rest is history, typically.
What was the so you outlined exceptionally well here the entire story roadmap, like how you got there, all those things. Tell the listeners a little bit about how you changed as a leader throughout this process and what were sort of the key takeaways that you could not anticipate when you joined the company originally.
Well, look, I think at the point is I didn't anticipate that to some extent, if you try just to build equipment or build 10 times better than the neighbor, it's not enough as a business case for service provider to buy it if you want. I mean, I came from almost the world at the time where if you built it, they're going to buy it. The reality is this access broadband market has so much entropy, legacy system. To some extent, most of the revenue of service provider came from enterprise and big city. They were kind of doing the minimum to keep the residential working because it was not a big revenue generator. They could only sell a pipe to them. So what we realize is even if we built it better, you need other catalysts around you to change an industry or to change the mindset of the people. And it turned out, again, when people had to work from home, they started to say, I want a good services. And if I don't, I'm going to switch from cable to this guy, to the service provider that provided to me. Otherwise, you're with the tree kid and you cannot run your business. It's crazy. And you cannot even go outside to take a break.
No.
So we got lucky. I never anticipate massive disruption like that on a global scale. I never anticipate that you could have everything that you need in one plan and not have to spend all your marketing on selling the why, but the discussion were, well, how do I get it? What can we do to accelerate deployment? What can we do to provide that to our end user? And then we had other problem in the mix because the demand became so crazy that we have supply chain issue. I don't know if you remember to around 2000.
I remember very well.
And that was again another thing. Oh my God! Now there's geopolitical thing.
Yeah.
At the time, it was U.S. and China that it's so frustrating. We could sell 10 times more everything we have on the deck. We cannot produce it.
Now, I remember I was in the hardware software space at the time, and I remember a specific meeting where our vendor said, if you want this, you better buy it all now because otherwise you will not see a product coming out of the factory for 6 months. And that was one of those like, okay, let's go find some money and get the proper inventory going here.
Yeah, and then look, you can imagine we face the same thing. So we have to, my colleague, which run the supply chain, has to pivot, get out to some extent of the Asia pole where we were, go to Vietnam and other place, Thailand, to generate the equipment. And then I was writing the logistic about where the boat are and how we're going to get it. So basically, everybody turned out to manage supply chain, from the salesperson, from managing expectation from us. And, decision we have to make, which is interesting because this thing that's going to happen a little bit this year, is the price of those supply chain components started to skyrocket as well. So you can imagine a pivot was like, do we charge for it? Do we just pass the cost to the end user? Or do we say, look, we're so fortunate to have such a surge of volume in business. Maybe we absorb it more and let the customer, we did that choice for them. And maybe it's going to give us some trust and customer retention moving forward. So we have to make decisions like that. I mean, none of this was anticipated. As much I can paint you a story that we were like the crystal ball. And
no. I would never believe that. But so a lot of these are external factors. What was going on internally in the company as people had to shift and change, and how were you managing that? Because those years were constantly inspect, adapt, like on a weekly basis. Walk me through how you managed that.
So I tell you a little bit how I live it. So part of the realization of we're going to need to build brand new class of product with technology that we're not familiar. basically also implied that you have to rethink your workforce.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things we had to figure out is at the scale of building so many systems at the same time came the realization that this company was limited by its own R&D. So we had to embrace partnership. And I don't know about you, but the first time you bring partner to engineer, they look at this to say, why they're here? I can do better than those guys.
Oh, not
Just give
invented here mentality. Any
the
engineer have that.
NIH is there. So we have to break that first. The second thing after that is we realized that we had great people, a lot of them, around 80% of the company at the time, that was the only place they live and work.
Mm-hmm.
They were 20 years in the company.
Wow.
As the founder, etc.
Not easy to change culture and yeah.
So if you go to them and you say, okay, our business plan is to completely flip the company over and we're going to take share or we're going to go belly up, their view is to say, whoa, folks, you're crazy. It took us 20 years to be one of the 3 companies that survive in that space. Why don't we just take it easy? There will be a tomorrow. So you can imagine there was resistance of non-invented here. There was a fear of reinvention.
Mm-hmm.
And the third fear was also, look, when you look at the skill, we don't have the portfolio of people that we're going to need also to. So one of the things which is sad in one way, and that's the burden of the leadership, is we did impact the workforce. And that's why I tell everybody to say, if you go to massive reinvention, you're not going to be able to see it with everybody. And when you're hearing, maybe 5% or 10% will be impacted. No, I had to go with the team 20, 30%.
And how many people were in the product or engineering team when you started versus when you left?
So when we started, just to give you a sense, there was probably around 100 people in R&D, no contractor. When we decided to put all the chip on the roulette, if you want, we went close to 1,000 with 500 employees and 500 partners over 3 years to build all those things like crazy, madness, on the large distributed scale, knowing that typically, as you know, a product adoption is you build a product, you grow. Eventually, you cap your headcount, you go 30% less because you have to provide the funding for sales to to bring it to the field, if you want, and retrain everything. So it was always a tool where I knew I will have to contract the budget. But because also there was the emergence of AI or machine learning, that forced us also to make adaptation that we didn't have at the time. We thought that, look, we'll take what we have, just put cloudifies everything we have, to realize that, no, we have to go inside real-time correlation and predictive networking.
Yep.
Those things didn't really exist at the time.
No.
Or the expertise was limited.
Yeah, 2016, 17.
Yeah. I mean, you were at the beginning of those neural network, if you say, at the time. So, look, there's a lot of change like that. I say we had to pivot. It comes at a cost. And then the second resistance we got was the field were panicking about, well, you're bringing stuff which is kind of not proven in the market. I don't want to take the risk in my account. So it was
you gotta love enterprise sales managers. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, and you go into but if you don't, you're gonna lose the business to others.
Exactly.
So this is where again I give credit to the lead of sales and the rest of the executive team, including the founder. We started to say, you have no choice. If you sell the whole, you're gonna be paid X. If you sell the new, you're going to have an accelerator much more. So ultimately, we force those account leaders to say, embrace the new world.
What was the hardest thing for the sales organization and the channel? Because you're kind of going here from a hardware sale to a service sale.
I think the hardest thing, it's two-phase. I think if I go back to the product, those products were much more advanced than what used to be sold in that space. Example, they were able to do layer 3 routing, layer 2 versus just pumping traffic over fiber.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a gap of expertise, if you want. There was also a gap to say, well, those things never exist in that space. You want me to promote something that maybe the customers say, I don't need. I don't want that. I just want the cheapest thing, that I can find for my customers. So we have to counter that. We have also to say, look, the traffic is going to continue to grow, and eventually 10 meg at all, not going to work. But again, we got lucky because there was a combination of everything, including data center moving out of big city. So you have to reach them. So you could see the service providers say, oh my God, the choke point of my network is moving in broadband. And that was the last place I wanted to make investment. So like I said, it's a perfect storm in one way. It's one what we ride the wave, but we don't create it all the element of the wave. But my whole point was like, we were always motivated by the end state of the founder. One day, all devices will be connected through Wi-Fi to fiber to their content. We're not going to stick. We're going to stick to it. We're not going to deviate from it. We're going to make it happen, or we'll close the bar.
So I wanted to call out here for the listeners how when you have a super strong vision and you have the majority to drive that vision also on a shareholder perspective, you can move mountains. But Michel, honestly, were there ever moments where you were like, okay, I'm not sure this is going to pan out, or like those moments where you're like, I know we have a strong vision, but like, did you ever have those moments, or you like, no, I'm locked in?
Well, I have multiple phases of this. So one of the aspects of the story is, in order for us to validate that we're building the next generation of those networks, we went to say, why don't we talk to the biggest provider if they see an interest in this? So we went to Verizon. Verizon say, hey, you painting a world of, we really like what you have in mind, but you have nothing to show us. Okay, we still want you to bid on that business. And we were awarded the business with literally concept, prototype.
Wow.
And for 3 years, we built the next generation of Verizon network and broadband, which is deployed now. And then I was like, whoa. In one way, we were excited because now we can say we can go in bigger market than broadband. Rural America, we can go in tier 1, tier 2, around the world. We have built now equipment that can go up and down. Nobody had that. But we were like, oh, there's contractual obligation now that we need to do. So that was my first fear, to say, did we overshoot? I mean, what's happening if we don't finish this? It's going to derail everything.
I lived that. The danger of landing a whale early on a technology adoption curve can really distract you because you have commitment. Like, I know it's a luxury problem, but I've lived the pain for that. So I can
if you remember those days, a lot of the company that went after the whale too early, they're the one that went down
up
in the water.
Yep.
So that was it. The second way was like, as we building this framework, and then you get the supply chain, you get all this, we were burning cash that exceeded essentially the revenue because we're transitioning everything. So the fears from all was like, wow, are we going to run out of cash before we can essentially finish a race, if you want? And that's where I think I discovered that other function in the company needed to reinvent everything as well. Finance, for example, they had essentially to find us bridge loan, etc., to carry it with a projection from sales when we won't need it. So everybody started to be connected, like glued together, like we were a startup at that point.
Yeah,
there's only one way, and there's point of no return. And look, it's a fantastic experience when you live it, but there was also like, we need to pivot. We need to start to see the revenue. And one of the things that didn't anticipate is all those new equipment, 3 years after the introduction, were now 95% of the revenue. So in one way where it's fascinating is we didn't have any more dependency on the whole. We could phase out all of this work. And I remember we basically had one engineer per class of product managing the whole install base that was still on those equipment. One.
Crazy. That is absolutely crazy.
Which basically led into when people were in the field were saying to say, is the product proven? Is there anybody on it? You say, yeah, good question. It's about time that you jump because you're the only one not on it. So the field started to build confidence because there was a critical mass to prove that it wasn't a dream.
So we talked now about these crazy war stories. You ended up writing a book, Beyond the Code. Tell me a little bit about what is that book about and what made you write it and who is it targeted for?
So I wrote the book because first I got feedback from friends to say, hey, you have such great stories. Why don't you put it so people can learn from it? And I said, I'm not too sure about that. I mean, I'm an engineer. I'm not really good in the branding like this. But I realized there was a story to tell. But I think the trigger for me was the frustration I was seeing in the market that I live in Silicon Valley. This call it one of the center worldwide of innovation and investment. If I look at the story of Silicon Valley, most of it is about startup. The story is always about the great CEO that came with an idea, reinvent, bring fire to the minion and, change the world. There's plenty of that. But if people don't call about is when you look into the success rate of startup, it's really small.
It is tiny, and those hero stories is one in 10,000 or 100,000. I don't know, maybe one in...
And if you follow the story of the one that made it, and you see what's happened 10 years after they sold their company or got acquired or went public, it's even smaller. And then I was like, how many logo of company that make it so big at the time still exist 20 years or 30 years after? I did a search on Google. I think I ended up with 6 or 7 logos. All the rest was a graveyard. And I realized personally, I got so frustrated to say, we need to talk about how we maintain investment that lasts, which is about renewal. Because typically with the way I describe it, I said, look, if you're the company 10 years to 20, what's happened is what's going to give up is your product is going to be proven, yes, but people are going to catch up with you. But worse is your infrastructure, because you have to make all those pivot, those concessions, those things to change the direction, not finish the job, etc. It's like a house that you start neglecting. Eventually, the roof is gonna leak, and then if you don't prepare for it, you're gonna see it's really gonna impact the way you live. So I realize that people don't like to talk about maintenance, planning, re-engineer. But you have to make it a cycle as important than building product. So I wanted to talk about it. And the last thing was the transformation of Calix. I say, oh my God, you're 20 years after, and then the world has completely changed from an assumption of how you build the company at the time. So even if you're successful, will you last? Will you remain when all those things is happening? Take AI, for example, and all of those things around, software defined. So I realized I like to talk about it because I learned from generation of leader that changed my ways of looking at things. The second thing was I read like everybody, I get, the annual leadership retreat when you read a book and they talk about decision and big bet and this and that. The reality is, most of the engineering leader, because they came from the technical ladder, are not prepared to become executive. So at one point of time, I realized I have to change my career to say, I can go deeper to be a specialist, great. But if I want to be a CXO level, I need to understand finance, business, acquisition, market penetration, adjacent market. You name it. There was all those competency that I say, oh, if I never get close to that, I'm never going to be these people. So I realized I needed to think about how do you change your career to get to essentially, if you want to become a CXO and you come from engineering, here's what I learned you should do. The last thing was about if you want to run an organization up to 1,000 of people, I mean, I have like at one point of time,
No,
6,500 people.
It's
So
massively different. 100 to
yeah,
500 to 1,000 to thousands. Like you can't even imagine it.
yeah. And then you have partner in the mix. So I said, look, it would be great to talk about that. Embrace partnership, embrace independent execution, empower the team, add your check and balance, get feedback, become customer savvy, learn their business, learn how they think, because they're going to tell you where the market is going. I was like, well, why not writing about that?
I love it.
Yeah. So that was the book. That's the book. And I thought it was a good story because at the end, I came from Quebec, a chicken farm. There's nothing in my curriculum, in my family that could have predict I would end up there. I said, why don't inspire people to say it's not where you're born that's going to dictate what you become. It's going to be you, essentially.
It's what you make of it.
Yeah, and your ability to take risks and your ability to partner with folks and build trust. And that was the story. I said, worst case scenario, I will have a nice book for my family to read.
Michel, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I want to wrap it up a little bit with a couple of quick questions, though, before I pivot over to you. And you can only answer with 3 to 5 words. First things that come to your mind. I have not prepared you for this, okay? And so what's the most misunderstood part of being a CTO?
It's about looking at the future. It's not about selling the now.
I love the answer. A leadership book that you always go back to and you can't pick your own.
So I like anything that Jeffrey Moore did because I had the chance to meet him. Jeffrey Moore is the person that came with Crossing the Chasm and a series of books. And I felt that there was so much learning to see how you think. Everything is cyclical. Everything has to be connected together. So it kind of really helped me to think broader than what I would have been able to get by myself.
Love that answer. I agree. Great book series. Last question. Finish this sentence. Leadership is
about providing context.
Gold. I agree. I love that definition. Okay.
Yeah.
Michel, thank you so much for joining the podcast. For the listeners out there who feel like, okay, I want to talk more to this guy, how can they find you? Where can they find your book? And who should be reaching out to you?
Yes. So if you go on LinkedIn, which is kind of the place for professional, if you want, in the business, I put essentially a website where people can engage with me, largely because also I was thinking into what I want to do now. And it's really about consulting and do fractional engagement and helping those entrepreneurs or company in different stage of maturity to say, look, if I can provide them ways to think about the problem in the different ways, that'll keep me in the business, that'll keep me motivated. So my website is a way to engage. You can book a calendar and we'll talk. And the book is also accessible from there and on Amazon Kindle. And it's called Beyond the Code. And it's about unveiling the human factor.
I love it. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Leaders Adapt, Michel. We could continue this conversation for hours. I have so many follow-up questions, but I want to thank the listeners of Leaders Adapt. If today's conversation helped you to think differently, or you know another leader or another entrepreneur who thinks or you think that could really benefit from listening to the show today, please share this podcast with them. Also, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. It helps other leaders and entrepreneurs find Adapt or Die. And for anyone else out there listening, please remember, in leadership, we adapt and thrive, or we don't survive. Until next time.